What's up, YouTube? So today I'll talk about some of the questions that they might ask you as a new person in Sweden. And one of these questions is, where do you come from? Maybe a Swedish person will ask you where you come from because they want to know about your country or about the experience in a country that you are from. Or an immigrant would like to know if you come from the same country as them, or maybe they have a friend who comes from a country as you are from, so they would like to share some of the experiences and some of the things that they know with you, or just to easily strike up a conversation too. And the other question that they may ask you in Sweden, of course, is why did you choose Sweden? Because Sweden is such a cold country that the cold literally takes the life out of you in the winter. And most of the people ask you, why did you choose Sweden of all countries? Well, of course, you could say, I chose Sweden because of because of the education system. I came to study, or I moved here for work, or I'm even married to someone who lives in Sweden, for example. And then the other question they will ask you is, where do you work? See, most of the times, someone just wants to understand exactly where you work and what kind of career path that you have taken. Do they share the same career path as you, or is there something that you could share or can learn from each other about their career, for example? But to the untrained eye, most of these questions, of course, seem very innocent. But I must tell you, these questions are not as innocent as they seem. Now let's examine one of the questions. Where do you come from? See, during the refugee crisis, very many people moved in Sweden. And of course, this made some of the Swedes uncomfortable because they presume that many people are moving into their country and they're changing the cultural makeup of the country itself, or that would cause problems for Sweden as a country itself. So to ask you where you come from, they want to know, do you come from some of these countries that moved in droves into Sweden some time ago? And of course, if you came from some of these countries, people don't like that. You will always have people will have a negative consideration towards you if you come from these countries. For example, if you come from Africa, they always assume you're not really coming to add any value, compared to someone who comes from Germany, for example, or if you come from Somalia, or if you come from Iran, or Iraq, or some of these places that had unfortunately faced war in the past, or even Ukraine. Of course, you will be perceived in a negative light. Unfortunately, I hate to tell you this. So this question, when they ask you this question, it is not necessarily to know where you come from, but it is to try to understand, are you from some of these countries, or people who are presumed to be filling up the country with people of other cultures and other religion, of course. Well, the majority of people will ask you because they want to learn, but always keep in mind that if they ask you this question, they want to know if you come from this country. And of course, if you come from these countries, they will perceive you in a negative light, and there's nothing you can do about it. The other question that they would ask you that seems innocent and yet it's not is, where do you work? You see, as an immigrant, some people assume that you only come to Sweden to live on social, on welfare. You don't really want to work, which is quite contrary to the truth. Most of the people I know are either working or are in school, or are trying so much to change their careers, or trying to improve their lives by learning a trade. In some of the Swedish schools, for example, they're learning how to be truck driver or to drive a bus, or they're learning even Swedish itself so that they can improve their chances of getting into places of higher education. So when they ask you where you work, they don't necessarily want to know the career you work in, but they want to know, do you work? Are you contributing something to the society? They want to see that you're contributing something to the society, of course, which, like I said, the majority of the people are contributing some, at least something to the society by going to work and by paying tax, for that matter, mostly if you're immigrant. So now that question, where do you work, is of course not an innocent question. Is to understand if you're contributing something. Well, mentioning where you work or if you work still does not protect you from being perceived in a negative light. Now, let's say someone is a native Sweden, has struggled to get a job, and maybe has not done quite well to get a job that they want. And let's assume that maybe you got that job. And maybe more often, the other person will feel a little bit uncomfortable that, wait, this person is an immigrant and already they have the job. And this is the kind of job that should go to a native Swede. And I am here and unemployed and I don't feel good about it. Well, the majority do not necessarily feel like that. But you will find some people who are unhappy about the fact that you are working. Now, still sticking to the question, where do you work? Let's assume you do not work at all. And there again, it's a problem, because if you don't work at all, they will assume that you're on welfare, and that you are bleeding off from the government, taking money from the government by being on welfare and not contributing something to the coffers, the tax coffers, which of course is a problem, to be perceived like that. And the other question, of course, sticking to where you work, is, you see, mostly people, not only in Sweden but in other societies, will try to group you, to put you in a box depending on the kind of career that you chose. If you do a much more blue collar job, let's say you do cleaning, or you do you work in a kitchen, the majority, of course, respect the types of job, in Sweden. It doesn't really matter. But some people will try to put you in a box to let you know that, listen, I work as an engineer, I work in IT, I'm better than you. You work in a kitchen, you work as a cleaner, you work as a bus driver, I'm really, really better than you. Asking you where you work is, of course, trying to gauge to see, am I better than you? Are you better than me? And sometimes it's quite annoying, of course, if someone asks you these questions without telling you something about themselves. You feel like you're being interrogated. Then the other reason is, why did you choose Sweden? I must say, I've always struggled with this, the question, why did you choose Sweden? Because obviously Sweden is a wonderful country. Well, you might choose Sweden because of some of the factors that I mentioned before, education, work, or to improve on your life. I've always become very paranoid, that if I mentioned why I choose Sweden, or why I chose to come and live in Sweden, therefore, I've always thought that someone is going to vote about it, to vote against it in the next election. That has always been in my brain for quite some time. So most of the time I will try to give a very vague answer, because it is like, it almost seems like an interrogation, of course, if someone is asking you these questions. And the other question that is, how long have you been in Sweden? Now, again, to the untrained eye, that is a very easy question. They just want to know how long you've been. No, absolutely not. They want to know, do you understand the Swedish people? Do you understand the culture? Do you know the language? So since you have been in Sweden for all this time, what exactly have you achieved? Questions that they might ask you in Sweden. So this may not necessarily be innocent questions. These questions are loaded. They are going to put you in a box. And some of these boxes, if they put you in it, it is almost impossible to get out of it. But you see, as someone who comes from out of Sweden, you should really do not let some people who are negative bring you down by asking you some questions that make you feel uncomfortable. You should be proud of yourself, because you are at least contributing something, to the society. You are going to work, you are paying the tax, you are stimulating the economy by buying things in shops and stuff. So you are actually contributing at a broader spectrum. Not to mention that most of the types of the jobs that you have, most of the Swedes usually do not want to take such jobs, so you should be proud of yourself and do not let anyone interrogate you into feeling guilty or feeling unwelcome in Sweden just because you are an immigrant. You should be proud of yourself. At least you are here and you are not colonizing, you are not stealing, you are not enslaving people. You are basically contributing, and that should be a plus. So those are some of the questions I thought I should really talk about when they ask you. Oh, and not to forget, how do you know if someone is just interrogating you for just for the purpose of interrogation and they don't necessarily want to keep a conversation with you? You can know this. For example, they might tell you, for example, my name is, they can mention their name and then they ask you and you, and then of course it's a two-way conversation. Or they may ask you, where I work, where do you work? And then when you say where you work, and they say, oh yeah, for me I work with such and such a place, I work in such and such a company. So it's a kind of a two-way thing. But be very wary about someone who just asks you one-way questions. Where do you work? Why did you choose Sweden? Are you going back to your country? Do you things like that, so you can easily know. And most especially, of course, you're going to find people who are more positive and more nice. But you always have to keep your guard up. You always have to watch out for people who have ulterior motives, so that they do not put you in this box that makes you feel inferior about yourself, because all human beings are the same. I've lived in Sweden. I've seen it all. Everyone is struggling with something that they are trying to achieve, or some problems. So depending on where you are, people are just the same, just maybe different colors. So thank you so much for watching. Keep the subscriptions coming, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.